All right, it looks like we are live. You are watching New Jersey Divorce Solutions Facebook Live. And I am Christina Previtt, the CEO and co-owner of New Jersey Divorce Solutions. Our guest today is Mike Wasylik, a Florida foreclosure attorney. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Christina, thanks for having me on today.
Of course, thank you. So just for our New Jersey listeners, if they're asking, why the heck is a Florida foreclosure attorney on the show today? Can you maybe give some insight onto that? Because it was a question I asked.
Absolutely. Well, there's two things that I think are going to be useful for people. Well, first of all, anywhere are going to benefit from the idea that certain things apply to all loans everywhere, because there's certain federal things that we're going to be talking about today. But also, too, with respect to whether it's New Jersey or Florida, there's a lot of commonalities in those two states about the way mortgages are handled, the way foreclosures are handled. And so when you combine those commonalities with the federal overlay that we're going to be talking about today for mortgage relief, I think there's going to be a lot of really relevant information for people, whether they're New Jersey or Florida or even some other states.
Yeah, great. Thank you for explaining that. So tell us what is going on with CARES. I'm assuming this is related to CARES.
It's in part, it's the CARES Act. Yes, absolutely.
Is this new stuff, or is this stuff that has existed? These laws that you're going to talk about.
It's a combination of new stuff and tweaks to some older things that all together combine to make a new kind of strategy necessary for navigating this particular pandemic if you're worried about making a mortgage payment. Today is the 29th, and most people are looking at a May 1st mortgage payment and probably looking at an empty wallet and, what am I going to do? And so that's kind of, why this is really timely and important right now for a lot of people.
Well, you said it correctly. So let's get into it. If we've got people out there, I know we do have people out there that are worried about how they're making their mortgage payments. What do you got for us?
Well, the first thing and foremost thing is that if you can make your mortgage payment, you really, really should. You don't want to fall behind unless you absolutely have to. Now, everybody's circumstances are different. Everyone's unique. And so you're going to have to make the decision for yourself about which expenses to prioritize. I mean, obviously, you want to keep food on the table. You want to keep a roof over your head, et cetera. You don't want to miss your mortgage payment unless you absolutely have to. But right now, if you are suffering from an economic hardship due to the pandemic, there are certain measures in federal law that are available to many borrowers, many homeowners, primarily those who have federally related mortgage loans. And that's a term of art, but I'm going to kind of use it in a looser way today, meaning that if a mortgage that is with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or it's backed by a federal agency like FHA, VA, or even some USDA loans are mortgage loans that are federally backed and have that kind of overlay of federal protection that was laid on precisely because of the pandemic. So
what do they do? What if they can't make the payment? What's their next step?
Well, first and foremost, the first step is to make sure, and I'm making a couple of assumptions here. If your goal is to keep the house, if your goal is to delay any kind of moving deadline, and if you want to stay in that house for the foreseeable future, that's part of it. If you want to protect your credit, that's part of it as well. If you want to avoid racking up late fees, that's part of it as well. So I'm making some assumptions about the goals. If that's your goal, then you want to make sure you either make that mortgage payment or you get what's called a forbearance. And a forbearance is simply a pause in the mortgage payment schedule. It doesn't relieve you. It's not forgiveness. Forbearance is not forgiveness. It doesn't wipe the payment away. It simply means that if, for example, coming up on May 1st, if you don't make that May 1st payment, you're not going to be considered late, and you're not going to be considered delinquent for purposes of starting the foreclosure process and the late payment, the late fees and things like that.
So when would you, if you're in forbearance status, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
well, yeah, once you get a forbearance, then that protects you.
Okay, so
temporarily.
How do you do that? How do you get to be forbearance status?
Okay, everybody's mortgage is with what's called a mortgage servicer, and so in order to know who that is, most people know who their mortgage servicer is because that's who sends them the monthly mortgage statements. But what most people don't realize is that their mortgage servicer is not who owns the loan. The servicer is just a middleman. And so they're responsible for sending in the statements, they collect the payments, and they process the loan, but the owner of the loan is usually somebody else. And according to some estimates, which I think are a little high, as many as 70% of all mortgage loans are within that federally related area that I talked about earlier, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or FHA, VA, USDA. And so the first step is finding out who your mortgage servicer is, because that's who you need to interact with to ask for that forbearance. And your monthly mortgage statement is going to tell you who that is. And most people, they look at their monthly mortgage statement, and when they're asking for relief, they pick up the phone and call. I believe that's a mistake for a lot of different reasons.
Why?
Well, number one, especially right now, you're going to find that the staffing for the call centers is, with the shutdown, the staffing is lowest it's ever been. The demand is highest it's ever been. At the end of March, forbearance requests went up something like 2,000%. So wow. more than probably ever in history. And so the demand for that phone center time is an all-time high. You're not going to get through. If you do, it's going to be hours on the phone. And when you do get through, you're talking to somebody who's probably not going to give you useful information. When you talk to a mortgage servicer on the phone, your rights are less protected than they are if you do it in writing. And so that's why I recommend, and I'm kind of out on a limb on this one. Like, a lot of people don't recommend this, it's not that they recommend against it, but people just say, pick up the phone and call. I don't recommend that. I do recommend doing it in writing. And
so
your mortgage statement.
Could that be email? Because when you say in writing, people are thinking I have to write some official letter and mail it, and then I'm not have to wait for an answer.
And the thing is that the severity of your situation requires that you don't take the easy way out, right? If you want a forbearance, if you want relief that's going to last, I think you need to take that extra effort. I think you need to put something in writing. I recommend sending a certified mail and keeping a copy. And I recommend sending it to the address that's on the back of your mortgage statement usually, or it's on the contact page for your servicer's website. So for example, if your loan's with Mr. Cooper or Wells Fargo or Chase or Quicken Loans or any of the number of servicers, they'll have a contact us page, and they'll give you that address to send qualified written requests or notices of error or requests for information. And I recommend that you send a certified letter to that address with a certain number of things in it. An email may not get to the right place and doesn't qualify for some of the protections that a letter does.
So, okay, so as lawyers, we're used to this. You send something certified and sometimes with return receipt requested, so that you have proof that somebody got it. So then what happens? Do you just sit and wait? Because some people are thinking they don't want to just not make the payment, but I sent a letter asking for a forbearance, and now what do I do?
Well, once you send the letter and you've got proof that you mailed it, that triggers protections. That's the beginning of you requesting assistance related to the pandemic, and that is the date on which your rights begin to be protected. It can work the same way with a phone call or an email, but it's much more difficult to prove. If you get in a fight with your lender later, it's much more difficult to prove it. That's why I recommend the certified mail.
What if you did this? Because I know there's all these people chomping at the bit to call. What if you call, but then send a letter confirming I had a phone call with so-and-so today, and this was the outcome, and send that certified with return receipt requested?
I know there are some people that recommend that as an alternative, and that's better than nothing. My concern is that when you get someone on the phone, if you get someone on the phone, what they tell you may not be true. Okay. And so when you're sending a letter saying, "Oh, Bob told me this," that may not be accurate. And so it's good that you put that in writing, and that way they give you that that way if they don't respond or they give you a correction, then you've got something in writing. So it's better than making a phone call and not doing anything in writing. But what they tell you on the phone may not be right.
Okay, that's fair. And we've all had that experience. So you send the letter. Now, do you just automatically get the forbearance just because you asked for it, or is there some approval process?
Well, if you have a pandemic-related economic problem, that's the reason for you not being able to make your mortgage payment, and you have one of those federally backed loans, then under current law, you get it, period. And the forbearance that's available to those people is a 6-month forbearance, meaning you don't have to pay your mortgage for 6 months, and it's renewable up to a total of 12 months. And now there's a catch in that at the end of that, it all becomes due, but there's ways to handle that as well.
So if you owe $20,000 at the end, you're expected to get current. Because there's been some debate about, some people think that the money just gets added to the end of the term. But
that's a very common, because that feels like it makes sense.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most mortgage servicers don't have the freedom to just say, oh, we'll just put it off. Because again, they have to answer to the owner of the loan. And so there's a couple ways they can address that. One is by inviting you to make a lump sum payment, which very few people can do. It's not the logical thing to do. Two, they can enter into a repayment plan over a short term, which is usually going to be 6 months, 12 months, or something along that nature. And again, most people, if they've been off work for 6 months or 12 months, or they've been not making a mortgage payment for that long, they're not going to be able to have a repayment plan on top of the regular mortgage payment. So that plan doesn't make a lot of sense either. It's the third option that most people are going to rely on once the forbearance ends, and that is going to be modification, which is a change in some of the terms of your loan that allows you to catch up on any past due amounts.
Okay, so we're going to get to that, but I do have one question. When you say forbearance, when somebody wants a forbearance, it has to be pandemic related. So obvious situations are someone who had to get laid off.
Right.
Or a business owner whose revenue has dropped significantly just because of what's going on. So you let me know where I may be wrong. What about somebody who maybe has increased expenses, like medical expenses related to the pandemic? Would that constitute a pandemic-related change?
I think it would, and there's no evaluation process for whether you're making that representation in good faith, really. The reality is everybody's affected in some way.
Okay.
And some people are still working, they're still making their full income, but everybody's affected in some way.
Okay. I mean, so someone who was having financial problems before and are still having financial problems in the same fashion, they could still take advantage of this too.
I think so, because I think those people are more likely to experience that their financial problems are getting worse.
Okay.
And again, like, they may have additional expenses. Now, if somebody looks at somebody who's having financial problems looks at their numbers in January of this year and then looks at them in April of this year and they're the same, they may have a more difficult time doing that with a straight face. And, I think it's important that you be able to make that there's some good faith basis to do that. There's some legitimate reason why you've been affected. If you haven't been affected at all, and I'm not sure who that would be, but if you haven't been affected at all and you still make that representation, right? I mean, there's certain Wall Street hedge fund managers that may be able to say, "Hey, actually, my fund went up, so I'm doing well." But again, you should only be asking for a forbearance if you actually are having trouble making that mortgage payment.
Yeah.
And so if you're not suffering some kind of economic loss from the pandemic, you shouldn't be making this request anyway.
So it's not really just an opportunity to say, oh, hey, you know what? I could get past making some mortgage payments for a little while and use that money for something else.
Right. People who are in that situation have a different opportunity. A lot of mortgage brokers right now, they're actually, and this is something that I'm struggling with, because a lot of mortgage brokers are not recommending they're putting out a lot of fear about forbearances. They're selling the refinance, which for people in that situation that we're talking about, where their income is stable, there's no economic injury, this is an opportunity for some of those people to refinance. And what that gets you is you probably get a lower interest rate because interest rates have dropped, and because of the way refinances typically work, your first payment isn't due right away. It's due June 1st or July 1st or whatever it is, depending on your closing date.
So it's April 29th. If my payment is due on Friday, can I just send the letter today and not pay on May 1st?
I would send it as soon as possible, number one. If you send it before you're behind, that triggers your protection. Number two, for most mortgages, there is a grace period built in that the payment due on May 1st isn't considered late for purposes of late charges for usually 15 days. So you're looking at May 15, and then it doesn't get reported to your credit until you're 30 days behind. Yeah. And foreclosure proceedings don't begin usually until you're 120 days behind. So if you're the short answer is do it as soon as you know there's going to be a problem.
Okay.
And if you do it now, if you do it now for May, you're going to be protected. But do it as soon as possible.
So even if you take advantage of the forbearance, is that still affecting your credit? Is it still being reported that you didn't pay?
If you get a forbearance, actually, in fact, the CARES Act has a very broad protection for credit for any kind of accommodation made under the pandemic situation. In other words, if you're having economic problems due to the pandemic and you ask any creditor for some kind of relief, whether it's a credit card, a car payment, anybody, and you're getting that accommodation, whether it's and this applies to mortgage forbearances and loss mitigation. So this protects you for potentially a year, or even if you get the modification, it protects you permanently from ever having this affect your credit. The CARES Act says if you get an accommodation for this pandemic-related economic problem, it cannot be negatively reported on your credit.
That's good to know, because I know a lot of people are very concerned about their credit scores. Right. So before we move on to the next thing, is there anything else that you think is important for people to know about forbearance that I haven't asked you?
Well, I think that the basic thing is, remember, it's just a pause. It's not forgiveness. You're going to have to accommodate in some way repaying that loan or repaying those missed payments in your loan before the end of the loan.
Okay, yeah. So I do want to make sure people understand that, because there's definitely, I've seen buzz on social media that people, it gets added to the end and it doesn't. So it's really important to know that. So right. I think the next potential solution is modification. Is that right?
That is what most people are going to be able to take advantage of. And again, this is something that is built into these federal loans, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, VA, and USDA, is that, and each program has slightly different terms, but the basic idea is still the same. It's that if you are in a forbearance for this for pandemic-related economic problems, the servicer is required to consider you for a modification. The most important thing you need to know about getting considered for modification is, at the end of the forbearance, your income really needs to be somewhere near where it was before the pandemic started.
Okay, so you could just go ahead and do the forbearance and then get a modification later, or you could just ask for a modification now?
The thing is, if you ask for a modification now, it's going to be based on today's income that you're taking home today. And so if you're having financial problems now that make you skip your mortgage payment, you're not going to qualify for them.
Okay, so
you have to
qualify. Sorry.
Yeah, it is a qualification, and the idea, the forbearance is a grace. Basically, think of it as a grace period to allow your income to recover. And then once your income is recovered, then you can enter the permanent relief of a modification.
Okay, so this assumes that this will all be over. We'll all be back to business as usual. People will be back to work. Right. What about people that get laid off and don't find jobs? I mean, when forbearance runs out, I think you said you could extend it to 12 months.
Right.
What happens after that?
Well, first of all, the 12-month period is based on today's policy. If the pandemic is more severe than we think, if it lasts longer than we think, there may be changes to federal policy. after that 12 months is expired. So we don't know yet what we can't predict what will happen in 12 months. But assuming nothing changes, after 12 months, if you still haven't recovered your income, then you're probably not going to be able to qualify for a modification or any other permanent relief. And then you're going to be looking at situations for foreclosure alternatives that essentially you agree in some way to give up your home, move to some place that you can afford, and there are ways to minimize the damage of having a foreclosure on your record by agreeing to surrender the home. That's obviously not ideal, but for somebody whose income is maybe say half of what it was, you're going to be looking for half the mortgage payment, and you probably aren't going to do that staying in the current house.
Okay. So when you do the modification, what does that entail really? Do you get a lower payment? Are you basically just entering into a whole, is it like a refinance?
Well, the difference between a modification and a refinance is that a modification is with your same lender based on some kind of economic hardship, which the pandemic absolutely qualifies you for. A refinance is with a third-party lender, like, if you have with Bank A, you go get a better loan with Bank B, that's a refinance. You have to have an income to support that, and you have to be current. A modification is just it's basically adjusting one or more terms of your loan to catch you up and to continue to make your mortgage payment affordable going forward. And there are 4 particular terms that most modifications address. 1 is the total principal balance, the total amount owed. 2 is the interest rate. 3 is the duration of the loan. And then 4 is the monthly mortgage payment, which is usually a function of the first 3.
Okay, that's good to know. What other options are you attuned to that we might want to share with people?
Sure. Some lenders are offering, and again, this may be outside of federal programs. This may be just individual to individual servicers. Some lenders are offering what they call deferment, which is actually taking this month's mortgage payment and rolling it onto the end of the loan. That's not very common due to the way most mortgages are structured and due to most state law regarding mortgages. So it's not common you'll see that, but that is one option some servicers are offering. Number 2 is you're seeing there are other types of after the forbearance you can enter repayment plans and things like that. Most people, if they're looking for relief right now, are looking for a forbearance because that is going to give you that breathing room to recover. In some extreme cases, I don't do bankruptcy, but in some extreme cases, bankruptcy may be an option for somebody, depending on what their goals are and what options are available to them there.
Now, when you were talking about doing the modification, you said there were some foreclosure alternatives where you just basically surrender the house. If the house has equity, and this might be a dumb question because if your house has equity, I would imagine you would just sell it.
Right.
But if you didn't do that, does the bank give you some of the equity? I mean, you wouldn't want to just give up your equity.
Well, and that's the thing. If you have equity, then usually you're just going to try and sell it on the open market. Now, if a foreclosure has begun, most buyers know that. That's public record. And so you'll get lower offers than if you try to sell it before a foreclosure begins.
Okay.
Now, one thing New Jersey has in common with Florida is we're both judicial foreclosure states, meaning that the bank has to file a lawsuit to successfully foreclose. It's that first lawsuit filing that is usually the trigger for public notice. People get stuff in the mail and all that.
Can you ever work out a deal with the bank where you just say, look, I can't make my payments, but I'm listing it for sale. And, at the closing, we'll get current. Do they do things like that? Well,
first of all, if you sell your home for more than you owe, then you have an absolute right to pay it off, at least in Florida. And I suspect New Jersey is the same. In fact, that's my understanding of every state where foreclosures are a thing at all, is that if your home is worth more than you owe, you absolutely have a right to sell it and pay it off. That's not a problem.
If you don't want to affect the value of the home on the market, can you work out a deal with the bank where they don't file the foreclosure papers? Because you're saying usually the value, people will lowball you on the offer.
Right. There are ways to prevent the first foreclosure filing that would trigger that lower value. One of them, ironically, is applying for a loan modification. If you are fewer than 120 days behind and you apply for a loan modification and your modification application is complete, then they can't start the foreclosure filing until they finish evaluating you for that and any administrative appeal period has run for that. So that can buy you some time, and you never know, you might actually qualify for some relief that you may not have thought you qualified for.
Okay, so I know I'm moving well beyond what happens after the forbearance, but this is all really interesting stuff, and it's not my area of expertise, so thank you so much. Is there anything that we should talk about for our viewers that I have not touched on, because you're the expert?
Well, I think that we've pretty much covered the ground. I think that the summary is that if your income is gone right now, you need a forbearance. And when it recovers, you'll want a modification if your goal is to stay in the home, protect your credit, prevent late fees from accumulating, and all of that. That's the main takeaway.
Is that something that you could help New Jersey residents with? Or would we need someone in New Jersey to do that?
I typically only represent people in Florida who have Florida property. I don't have anybody specific in New Jersey right now. But I could, actually, I have a former partner who's still licensed in New Jersey. So, and he's down here in Florida, but he is licensed in New Jersey. So he could, in theory, help out with that. But I would recommend a New Jersey licensed lawyer help out with that process.
Okay. And we may have people in New Jersey who are snowbirds, who have property in Florida.
Absolutely. Very common.
To be a snowbird. So it sounds like this can get very technical. I wouldn't want someone to just rely on this conversation as legal advice. So if you find yourself in this predicament, I absolutely would recommend that you consult with someone like Mike, or you could even call Mike's office and he can maybe redirect you if he needs to. But this does seem to require careful planning and strategy.
Absolutely. Strategy is the best word for it. And part of that is because there's no guarantee, you can do the things that we've talked about. There's no guarantee of outcome. This is just a plan to increase your odds of getting a good result. It's a strategy, it's a plan, but plans don't always work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. I definitely got an education from this conversation. I hope our viewers did too. And if somebody does want to reach out to you for more information, what's the best way for them to do that?
So a couple ways. You can go to my website. It's ricardolaw.com, spelled just like it sounds. There's a contact us form there. You can call my office at 352-567-3173. That's 352-567-3173. Also have a pretty robust YouTube channel, and it's easy to find, rwlawtv.com. And I've done probably close to 100 videos on foreclosure, debt collection, credit reports, things like that. So that's a good way to get information and then contact me.
Excellent. Well, you definitely know what you're talking about, Mike. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. Well,
thanks for having me on. I just really hope that people get something out of this and help. It helps diffuse a lot of the misinformation that's out there right now.
I do too. I don't want people to just suffer at home and worry about these things. Ask for help. That's the best thing to do. There are people far more knowledgeable than me, than yourselves, that know about these issues, and they can help you. So please don't be afraid to reach out to them. All right, Mike.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Well, Christina, thank you. And it's been a real pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everybody.